after the various calls for the Persatuan Bola Sepak Malaysia Executive Committee and to resign, whether it's from the fans or from various stakeholders, the inevitable finally happened earlier this afternoon, as was actually predicted in the rumors last week, as former acting president Dato Yusof Mahadi announced in a special conference that the entire FAM executive committee, which was supposed to run from for the term of 2025 until 2029, has decided on a mass resignation. So right now, it's going to be right now at this moment there will be empat orang jawatan kuasa sementara, where the ketua is reinstated Secretary General Noor Azman Hamzah, and at the same time, with this, what I will interpret as the ad hoc normalization committee is an ad hoc normalization committee. They officially call it as a interim committee. And the difference between what I said in the last video on what I would expect when FIFA decided to install a normalization committee to the structure that is right now in place after the special press conference in the FAM headquarters in Kelana Jaya earlier this afternoon, there will be, as what is predicted, works within similar frameworks of what is expected of a FIFA normalization committee, except that this time is the continental governing body Asian Football Confederation, which is located at Bukit Jalil, who will supervise these proceedings throughout this transitional period, which is expected to last until September or October this year, where fresh elections for a new executive committee will be called in the upcoming FAM Congress this year. And this year is particularly significant as what former sports journalists and ex-FAM Exco committee in the previous term, Datuk Christopher Raj, has tweeted. He said that this will be an election of consequence where the selection of the new committee will decide the future of the next 100 years of Malaysian football in its centennial year, which is this year. So, this committee that is formed, the forming committee, which comprises, as I mentioned, the current reinstated General Secretary Noor Azman Hamzah, the FAM Treasurer Datuk Ismail Karim, and two heads of departments within FAM. And this committee reports directly to AFC, and it is likely that FIFA already has knowledge of this matter. And the AFC has also appointed a team of consultants who will come from both AFC and FIFA, who will be led by AFC Assistant General Secretary Vahid Kadhani of Iran, who will report the findings to all the relevant stakeholders or governing or the associated involved governing bodies, which will in this case FIFA, AFC, and also ultimately to all the delegates in the upcoming FAM Congress in September or October, in the last third of this year. So during this period, this informal interim committee will now be in charge of the day-to-day operations of FAM until the new executive committee is in place. So having explained the key details of this, I'll now go straight into those question marks that remain unanswered or unresolved from what I read and what I've seen in those reports. First, is Noor Azman Hamzah the right man to lead the interim committee? Because he's not totally out of the woods, even though he was partially cleared of wrongdoing for his role in the documentation scandal, which involved 7 foreign bond players who represented Malaysia last year. And he was eventually reprimanded for his role in, I think, only from one organization for his part in the administrative oversight. But here's the but he's not totally out of the woods yet. And given his own previous role as General Secretary in the centerpiece of this documentation forgery scandal, why is he allowed to be the guy to lead FAM on a daily basis during this transitional period from now until the third or final quarter of the year? So, why is he trusted? Is this an internal arrangement by the Persatuan Bola Sepak Malaysia, or was it because AFC still believes that FAM sort of knows what it needs to do to get the day-to-day operations running, which is still the case, but why this guy? That's my very first question. Why is this guy still entrusted? And given that this normalization committee comprises of 4 members, which is within the usual framework of what a typical FIFA normalization committee will be, would it be fair to say that is this a half decision between FAM and AFC on this part? Second, the actual more ideal candidate to lead FAM in the interim should be the FAM treasurer Dato Ismail Karim, who is not part of the EXCO and who is not implicated in the scandal. The 70-year-old actually has an impeccable corporate record. He has experience in the administrative areas. He has experience in football administration, given that he is the president of the Johor Football Association, the state FA of football in the southernmost peninsular state. But, here's a but. The problem is, unfortunately, sections of the football fraternity may not be too enamored with what they see as already the overt southern influence. So would that be a hindrance in what would otherwise have been a more suitable candidate to run this to run FAM on the interim? Because I'll use the example of neighboring country Singapore, when the Football Association of Singapore was implicated in the donation scandal back in the 2015, I think, prior to the 2017 elections that was arranged by FIFA. And in between, prior to that, there was actually a brief normalization committee in which the leader of the then transitional committee, the normalization committee that was actually appointed by FIFA and AFC, was the late Lim Kia Tong, who was not involved in the donation gate scandal that implicated the then General Secretary Winston Lee, who was eventually cleared of wrongdoing, and former FAS President Zainuddin Nordin, who was also eventually cleared of wrongdoing as well. And in this case, I think I go slightly back to the first question. Now that I've said this part, why should Noor Azman be allowed to lead FAM given his role in this wrongdoing? Yes, he's the head of the administrative day-to-day operations, but I do think somebody else should run it on the interim while it was concerned, because in Singapore's case back in the between 2015 and 2017, the General Secretary Winston was eventually replaced by Yazim Buhari, and Winston was still running in his role as General Secretary during the transitional period. He was not involved in the elections, but his indirect role in the donation gate that exploded during the latter part of the FAS Executive Council elections in 2017 saw Winston Lee being eventually replaced. So could this be the same fate that before on Noor Azman? Now, from the way we see this composition of the interim committee, which I will now interpret as the ad hoc normalization committee. The ad hoc, that means it's not an actual appointment by FIFA, but this is ad hoc because AFC is the one doing this role. So in this case, AFC only holds the audit authority where they will check on everything that FVM has done in the governance over those years, where AFC will lead a team of theirs and FIFA appointed consultants to see which areas FVM has not been doing right or as well. But given the formulation of this type of leadership, the question is, does AFC has the authority to decide that, given Noor Azman's role, who he's not fully out of the woods, should he be allowed to continue, or should a new Secretary General be appointed under AFC or FIFA's auspices or oversight to take control of the day-to-day administration, given that there's no Deputy General Secretary to take over Noor Azman at this moment? There's no Deputy General Secretary throughout this term that was supposed to have ended in 2029. So, in short, all they can do is to audit everything that has happened in FVM over those years, but can they really call the shots during this transitional period, which is expected to last roughly 8 to 9 months? And ultimately, there's something that leads to this very curious point on the constitution of the interim committee and the mass resignation of the now former FAM exco. Was the temporary lifting of the suspension of the 7 players as ordered by the Court of Arbitration of Sports to FIFA 2 days ago a reprieve for the General Secretary or a concession to allow the former FAM leadership to step aside? This is the puzzling question that would not have been answered. Was it like, okay, CAS took a step back with FIFA's, I think CAS FIFA took a step back? Does it mean in a quid pro quo or likewise FM Exco to step down, so that, as what I mentioned in the last video, in what Datuk Winston John, the General Secretary of the AFC, he had said in last week's media report that it has to go hand in hand. The mass resignation and the reform or the process of auditing and reforming the administration in FAM must go hand in hand. This has taken place right now. But was the lifting of the 7 players the final boost for this former FAM Exco to resign collectively on their terms? We do not know. And finally, there's still one more during this transition period. There's still one crucial event that will determine the fate of Malaysian football for at least a year or two. It is pretty clear now that there will be no suspension of the Persatuan Bola Sepak Malaysia, whatever the verdict from the Court of Arbitration of Sports is, unless the French-based sports court decide that they would impose heavier sanctions on FAM instead after the appeal. That is the only one possibility. Given while we await the CAS verdict, we will know us after that when it's released. We will know Azman be forcibly removed from the role that he's not totally out of the woods. So what happens then? What will FIFA actually do next? Because, as I've said earlier, currently this forming in interim committee, I prefer to call it the ad hoc FAM AFC normalization committee. these four men, led by a questionable Secretary General, will FIFA decide to intervene and say, you can still keep this committee, but you have to take Noor Azman out of the equation altogether? Or will, or will FIFA decide that they will take full control, put in a different normalization committee, which is within FIFA's powers to do so, because of the mandate and to, you can say, to the extent, the vindication of the final verdict that was given down by CAS. So with that in mind, I think the suspense is actually not over yet. Either on the 25th or 26th of February, when the full outcome of the CS verdict on FM's appeal against the FIFA rulings on, I'll repeat it before the end, currently the 1 year suspension of those 7 affected players are currently lifted for now. Will they be suspended again? We do not know. Second, will FM be able to avoid a potential 6-point penalty because of them using the illegal foreigners? We do not know as well. So, in other words, we have to see whether FIFA will decide that what AFC has done is enough or otherwise, and will this 4-man normalization committee be sufficient enough, or otherwise, if AFC or rather FIFA, if they want to act, will Noor Azman be removed, a new GenSec be appointed, but be probably under the leadership of the FM treasurer Noor Azman. Dato Ismail Karim. Yeah. Will that be the case? Or will new members be appointed into this ad hoc normalization committee to provide a certain legitimacy to how Kelana Jaya is going to be run for the football affairs for the rest of its centennial year?